I did think there would be a little more people here. So it might be for those in Zoom world. It are How are you affected by the assassination of Mr. Kirk? I don't know. I know some have. Um, he was born in 1993, so I was uh, becoming an adult. So I don't. He didn't have a shaping influence on my life, but for others in our church, you sort of came of age at the same time he did. So, are there any questions before we move on to our topic? I know some are significantly affected by this, and I would always encourage one not to go onto the internet and um, to seek to make your responses, nor to read others' responses. I think you should gather with particularly people in your church, especially those who would be wise. Hopefully, that would include pastors, but not restricted to them, so that you might be helped to think biblically about these things. Well, with that, we turn to the book of Joshua. And I love the way it is in the two Bibles that I'm looking at. One is the New American Standard and then the Legacy Standard. But whatever Bible you're reading, when you see the text move immediately from the end of Deuteronomy to the book of Joshua, that's how you should read it. That there is a continuation when we end the Torah, that is the first five books of the Old Testament, with what we now call the prophets. And you have heard the word Tanakh, which is the Hebrew word referring to the Old Testament. That's our phrase, or the Hebrew Bible. That would be the way the Jews would refer to the what we call the Old Testament. But Tanakh is the word that they use for it. It's an abbreviation. The T is for the Torah, and the N is for the Hebrew word for the prophets. And Joshua is the first book of the prophets. And what the book of Joshua does is it provides for us the connection from the first five books, the Torah, with the message of the prophets. And so it's beautiful to be able to read the end of Deuteronomy and to read the beginning of Joshua, and you are able to see the connection that is going to exist between the law and the prophets. I'm going to do that for us. The end of Deuteronomy reads, starting in verse 9. Now Joshua the son of Nun was filled with the spirit of wisdom, for Moses had laid his hands on him, and the sons of Israel listened to him and did as the Lord had commanded Moses. And since that time, no prophet has arisen in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. For all the signs and wonders which the Lord sent him to perform in the land of Egypt against Pharaoh, all his servants, and all his land, and for all the mighty power and for all the great terror which Moses performed in the sight of all Israel. Now it came, this is Joshua 1, verse 1. Now it came about after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord, that the Lord spoke to Joshua the son of Nun, Moses' servant, saying, Moses, my servant, is dead, and now therefore arise, cross this Jordan, you and all this people, to the land which I am giving to them, to the sons of Israel. Every place on which the sole of your foot treads, I have given it to you, just as I spoke to Moses. From the wilderness and this Lebanon, even as far as the great river, the river Euphrates, and all the land of the Hittites, and as far as the great sea towards the setting of the sun, will be your territory. No man will be able to stand before you all the days of your life. Just as I have been with Moses, I will be with you. I will not fail you or forsake you. Be strong and courageous, for you shall give this people possession of the land which I swore to their fathers to give to them, to give them. Only be strong and very courageous. Be careful to do according to all the law which Moses, my servant, commanded you, Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may have success wherever you go. This book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do according to all that is written in it. For then you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have success. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not tremble or be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. Here we're able to see that the first 9 verses of Joshua connect us with the ending of Deuteronomy for a few important ways. Number one, the confidence that is given to Joshua is rooted in Yahweh, his God, and what he has promised. Now, we've been able to add some contours to that, and we're even able to see how the word which came to Joshua includes this. But he was able, Yahweh said to Joshua that it is because of the promise that he has made to their fathers. So, what was that promise? When it came to the land, when was the land promised to the fathers of Israel? It's a real question. I know there's only 3 of you, but you're going to have to be good students. The Abrahamic promise. In Genesis chapter 12, the first 3 verses is where we're able to see Yahweh made this promise to Abraham. And so it is the covenant promises that Yahweh made to Abraham. Therefore, what we're able to see is the reason that Joshua is to be strong and courageous and not to fear is because Yahweh has made promises, covenant promises. His confidence is to arise out of Yahweh's faithfulness to his covenant promises. That is why Joshua must understand that the Lord will be the one who will give to Israel the land that is promised. That clearly means Joshua is not different or separated from the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Old Testament. It is a continuation. It is framed with an understanding that is only able to be known if you have read the first 5 books of the Old Testament. Another connection is we clearly see in Joshua that he is in the type of leader that Moses was to Israel. Since Moses is called in verse 1, the servant of the Lord, Joshua, as Moses' servant, is now Yahweh's servant to the sons of Israel. So Joshua is the replacement of the same, in one sense, Mosaic-like role in the life of Israel. And so continuity continues as we enter into the book of Joshua. Now, I'm going to ask you to pan back in your mind, and again, we're thinking about the whole Hebrew Bible, and that is, this is the first of the books of the prophets. Now, we'll divide the book of the prophets the way the Hebrew Bible does, and we'll call them the former and then the latter prophets. In the Hebrew Bible, we have Joshua all the way through Kings. That's the former prophets. Then you go through the latter prophets, which we would tend to associate to be the major prophets and the minor, but they'll be in a different order. But what this enables us to see is that the beginning of the book of the prophets is with Joshua, which enables us even at a macro level of understanding what kind of book, or maybe we should say, what kind of message is the book of Joshua going to give to us? A prophetic message, a future-oriented message. It's not only going to be telling us what did take place as Joshua led this generation of Israel into Canaan, but it's going to be telling us beyond that. It's going to be telling us more than that. So that's understanding. Joshua is the first book of the former prophets. Continuing from the book of Deuteronomy helps us to have the right expectation for what is going to be the message that we're going to receive from the book of Joshua. Now, this whole section of prophets, so the N sound in Tanakh, is also helpful for what we are going to see is the Torah provided for us these 5 narrative books, and then the prophets function to give us a theological reflection and explanation, especially because we're going to find it to be highly poetic, though we do have narratives like Joshua, but it's going to give us this theological commentary that is in between the first portion, which is narrative, and the last portion, which is also going to be narrative. The K of the Tanakh. And that is to say, is when we finish the prophets and we turn to Daniel, and then we conclude with Chronicles, we're going to be given narratives. And so what we begin now with Joshua is how do we have theological commentary that indeed echoes God's past covenant promises as well as his past judgments with God's future focus of salvation. So by way of introduction into the larger frame of the prophets in the Hebrew Bible, I want you to be able to see that Isaiah chapter 6 is going to be like a little nugget, like a little snapshot that enables us to see, okay, this is one kernel that operates in a way that helps us to understand how the whole kind of cob of the prophets works. In Isaiah chapter 6, verse 13, well, let me get back. Let's start in verse 11. No, I'm going to go to verse 8. Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, whom shall I send and who will go for us? Then, this is Isaiah, he said, here am I, send me. He said, go and tell this people, keep on hearing, but do not understand. Keep on seeing, but do not know. Render the hearts of this people insensitive, their ears dull, and their eyes dim, lest they see with their eyes and hear with their ears and understand with their hearts and return and be healed. Then I said, how long, Lord? Or Lord, how long? And he said, until cities are devastated and without inhabitant, houses are without people, and the land is devastated to desolation. And Yahweh has removed men far away, and the forsaken places are many in the midst of the land. All right, so just so we can get it, Isaiah is commanded to go and to speak God's message to us, and yet the effect of the message will be hardening, blindness, dullness, and disobedience. And because of that, they are going to be visited with God's judgment. But then look at verse 13. Yet there will be a 10th portion in it, and it will again be subject to burning, like a terebinth or like an oak, whose stump remains when it is felled. The holy seed is its stump. And then we're going to jump over to chapter 11, verse 1. Then a shoot will spring from the stem of Jesse, and a branch from his roots will bear fruit. The Spirit of Yahweh will rest on him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and the fear of Yahweh. And he will delight in the fear of Yahweh, and he will not judge by what his eyes see, nor render a decision by what his ears hear. But with righteousness he will judge the poor, and decide with uprightness for the afflicted of the earth. And he will strike the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips he will put the wicked to death. Also righteousness will be the belt of his loins, and faithfulness the belt of his waist. We'll stop there. Here we're able to see like a little kernel of how the prophets are going to give to us a message that in one sense we have already learned in the Torah. But we're going to see the message will be that the problem remains within Israel, that their hearts are not, in Moses' metaphor, circumcised. They are unclean. And until God changes their hearts, they're going to do what they have done, and that is they will disobey. They especially will give themselves over to idolatry, and God will be faithful to judge them. However, in the judgment, which will lead them into exile, God will indeed retain a remnant, and from that remnant there will come one. In that sense, we see like a stump has a shoot, and from that shoot there will come this one whom God has promised in the future, who will bring about ultimate salvation. Right? And in a sense, Joshua begins this larger, developed theological commentary that helps us to see that indeed the message that we've learned from the Torah is now going to be explained and developed and continued throughout the commentary of the prophets, and then it will come to its conclusion with Daniel through the end of the Hebrew Bible with Chronicles. So here we have this new Moses, and he has this new mandate, and that is he's going to take Israel into Canaan, and he is to, because of God's faithfulness to his covenant promises, he is to be strong and courageous. And in verses 8 and 9 in Joshua chapter 1, what is the key to success? Now we know the basis, that's God's covenant promises and him, God being faithful to those covenant promises. Those are the promises to Abraham. But for Joshua, he's given a key to success. What is the key to success? What's that, Chris? The book of, what is he to do with the book of the law? That's right. It does not depart from his mouth. He's to meditate on it day and night, to be careful to do according to all that is written in it, for then you will make your way prosperous, then you will have success. Now, what do you think the book of the law refers to? First 5 books, it is the Torah. It's the book of Moses. It is, as Jesus says, the law. It is not referring to the 10 Commandments. It's referring to the message of the Torah. Now, that does include, because of the Sinai covenant to which Israel is in Joshua at the very end, they are going to renew that covenant in chapter 24. But here we're able to see success for Joshua is going to come by his meditation and keeping the message of Torah. Now, we also have to turn over and see that significantly, how does the book of Psalms begin? Blessed is the man who does not walk in the way of the counsel, nor stand in the path of sinners, nor sit in the seat of scoffers, but his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law he meditates day and night. He will be like a tree firmly planted by streams of waters, which yields its fruit in its season, and its leaf does not wither, and whatever he does, he prospers. The wicked are not so, but they like chaff, which the wind drives away. Therefore, the wicked will not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the assembly of the righteous. For the Lord knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked will perish. See, what is given to Joshua was the same thing that was given to Israel. And we also see the Psalms present to us in the very beginning, this is the way of success with Yahweh. Now, ultimate success of God's covenant promises are achieved in the one that we've seen in Isaiah 11, verse 1. This one who will come from from Judah. All right, that in that sense, Jesus is the ultimate one who indeed will achieve this. But for all of God's leaders leading his people, this is the way of success. The meditation on God's Torah is the way in which there will be blessing and prosperous, right? The pattern that we will see is that indeed leaders that God gives to Israel, and in this case Joshua, but then when we get to Judges, we will see the same. And when we find through all of the failures of the kings, there will only be just a literal handful of kings that will rise up, and they will be good kings. And all of those good leaders, which function to more or less curb or restrict the idolatrous practices of Israel, but those good leaders will have success for doing the same thing, that they will fear the Lord and they will love his law. Thus, their practice is to meditate on the book of the law, the Torah, right? The book of prophets, the former prophets as well as the latter prophets, we're going to see this pattern. And Joshua is the first. Now, we've met Joshua before in Exodus chapter 17, verses 8 through 13. He is always associated with who is the son of. He is the son of Nun. First Chronicles chapter 7, verses 20 through 28 will also narrate him in this context. He is of the tribe of Ephraim, so we could call him an Ephraimite from Numbers 13, verse 8. And so he is to begin by keeping the Torah. But in one sense, Malachi chapter 4, verses 4 through 6 is an expectation that he's also to expect a greater prophet who is to come. Now, what is especially tragic about the message of the former prophets is they begin here with Joshua taking Israel into Canaan, being strong and courageous because of Yahweh's covenant promises to Abraham. But how do they end? I just gave you a little tip because we read from Isaiah how they would end. But in 2 Kings chapter 25, we're able to read there. We're not going to read it all, but there you would see that while they come into, and we will read of the victories, at least we'll read of portions of the victories that Joshua leads Israel to have, the actual former prophets will end with the cities of Judah being devastated by Babylon. Its inhabitants are dead or taken away in exile, and the land is the same Hebrew phrase, formless and void, like creation was before God did day 2 through day 6 in creation week. So the theological commentary that Joshua begins is one that we're going to see is Israel still fails. But yet it will be in this failure of Israel, we will see God honing in specific promises about Israel's hope, which is coming to them in the future, who is the Messiah. Now, on the issue of authorship, who wrote the book of Joshua, we have no explicit answer. Obviously, the key figure is the one whose name marks the book, Joshua. That doesn't necessarily mean that he is the author. It doesn't necessarily mean that he is not the author. Many aspects of the book of Joshua seem to utilize eyewitness accounts, and that would, in one sense, lean one to think that Joshua was a part of writing the book of Joshua. But the book of Joshua also utilizes information that requires knowledge of things that occurred out after Joshua's life. So that makes us conclude either Joshua had some prophetic insight to what would follow, or somebody after Joshua wrote those sections. So it could be that it's Joshua writing and then someone later using what Joshua wrote and composing the book that we have, and we rightly call it the book of Joshua. Now, thinking big picture, I want to give you the broader understanding of Joshua. One, we're able to see that the message of Joshua is accenting they almost seem as if they are a paradox, but they're not. I mean, these are the two emphases of the message of Joshua. Number one, Yahweh's faithfulness to his covenant promises to Abraham. Joshua will narrate events that enable us to see God keeps his covenant promises. What God has promised in his covenant to Abraham, he will deliver on those covenant promises. And here we will see partial fulfillment of those covenant promises to Abraham. The second main part of the message of Joshua is that Israel fails to keep the covenant that they made with Yahweh at Sinai. There will be failure of Israel to trust and obey. In one sense, as we see, the key for Joshua is that he is to meditate on Torah and observe all of it. And Israel is to, he will even lead them at the end. He will lead them and they will accept. In one sense, just like they did with Moses at Sinai, they will do again in Canaan at Shechem, where the tabernacle is set up. They will there at Shechem renew the Sinaitic covenant, but not at Sinai, now in Canaan, at Shechem. And yet, Joshua, the book of Joshua, will enable us to know Israel has failed and Israel will fail in the future. So the book of Joshua is going to show both of those. Now, not as significant, but still very clear in the book of Joshua, we will see that godly leadership is what curbs Israel's idolatry. So the reason that Israel is not as disobedient as they could be is not because of Israel. It is because of God's gracious gift to them of leaders like Joshua. And when we get to Judges, that again is going to be the refrain. And so Joshua is God giving to Israel a godly leader that is going to function such that the leader is what curbs Israel from further judgment of God. Now, it's interesting when we are able to look, and I'm really taking this from other people, but when you divide the book of Joshua up, here is a division that I'll give to you. There's a number of divisions, but the first 5 chapters of Joshua, they are describing Israel passing through the Jordan into Canaan. And in Hebrew, the particular verb that is going to be emphasized in those first 5 chapters is the verb we translate in English, passing over. Passing over. That's the key verb. And it is chabar. Now, yabar. What that would, keep that in mind at how that sounds to you as a main verb. So that if we're reading in Hebrew, you would hear in the first 5 chapters, yabar, 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 as we'll in English, passing over, passing over, passing over. The next section, chapters 6 through 11, is Israel taking Canaan. The land now Israel takes, and the key verb is taking. And the way that would sound if we were Hebrew readers and hearers would be lakach. The next section in Joshua is chapters 12 through 22, and that section explains Canaan being divided and given to the tribes of Israel. So the key word is divide or appoint. And that verb is halach. So notice the 2 middle key verbs, or at least let me finish. The next section is chapters 23 and 24, and there the key verb is serve, because there Israel is commanded to serve Yahweh. But serve in Hebrew is yabach. So the first main verb, yabar, sounds similar to the last main verb, yahad, and the 2 middle sections, the verb for take, lakach, sounds the same as or similar as the next main verb, halak, which means divide, indicating that if we were reading the book of Joshua out loud, these main verbs would create for us 4 divisions that are giving us the four, in one sense, advancements of the book of Joshua. Israel passes over the Jordan and into Canaan, the first 5 chapters. Israel takes the land, chapters 6 through 11. Israel divides the land to the tribes, chapters 12 through 22. And then lastly, 23 and 24, Israel is called to serve Yahweh with their whole hearts. So if you like divisions, one of the reasons it can be helpful, if you're here at this class, all 3 of you, if you're here at this class so that you might understand and know the Old Testament, understanding the message of the book with a simple division can help you recall it and be able to understand how it works together as a whole book. What is going to be significant as we think about the message of Joshua is the way in which Joshua is going to frame our understanding of Canaan. So Joshua 1:8 tells us that Joshua is to indeed meditate on the book of the law day and night and to observe all that is in the book of the law. And we know from the book of the law that there was first an Eden, that Adam was exiled. And eventually from Adam's descendants, we know that God chose Abraham and promised to Abraham a land. And then as Abraham's descendants, you remember, as they are now being called out of Egypt, they are being called to a place where they will go, and what will they do? They will serve Yahweh. Right? That word serve is the word that we are going to see accenting in the last 2 chapters, but it also is accenting that they are going to worship Yahweh. And in fulfillment, this is all happening in Exodus, from the Exodus of Israel to the very end of Exodus, where Yahweh comes and he fills the tabernacle. We're seeing God is keeping his promises. But in the construction of the tabernacle, the model that was given was that Moses saw God's dwelling in heaven and created a model of it on earth. And it's remarkably similar to what we saw Eden being constructed by God for Adam. And when we come to the way in which Joshua is going to talk about the framing of Israel coming into Canaan and the language that he will use, and then the tabernacle being set up at Shechem, we will see in one sense now there is a new Eden, Canaan, where God is present in his tabernacle dwelling there. And so there is going to be, in one sense, this continuation of the same vision of what did God make the world for. He made the world such that there would be a people and they would be placed by God in a particular location, and there they would know God, for God would dwell among them. As we go with Joshua and this generation of Israel into Canaan, there's this expectation in the way that Joshua is going to narrate how, or whoever wrote Joshua narrates it this way, that Canaan is like a new Eden. Joshua is like this new Moses, and they're going to have, in one sense, God present, not at Sinai, but in Shechem, in the tabernacle. And in one sense, the pregnant question is, are things going to be different? Is Israel now going to do what Israel has failed to do in the past? Are they going to have hearts that have been circumcised? Are they going to love the Lord their God? And therefore, because they love the Lord their God and they fear him, are they going to keep his commandments? That's the pregnant question that we have being set up for us as we see how Joshua gives that. And therefore, we are going to learn, this is again, I'm giving you the answers, and then we'll kind of narrate our way through it tonight and next week. We're going to learn theological lessons from the book of Joshua that indeed continue for us today. And some of these are, I think, even very relevant as we're trying to get our feet underneath us with some of the reasons that we may be able to say, like, I reject this and I support that. Here's one of the lessons. The basis for the way in which Israel goes into Canaan and knows that Canaan will be given to them is because the God of the covenant is also the God of creation. So the way in which the God of creation is hearkened back in the book of Joshua is because the God of the covenant promises that are being kept in the conquest of Canaan by giving this land to Abraham's descendants is because the God of creation, who spoke everything into existence and therefore owns everything as his own, he also is the one who is able to give creation as he chooses to his people. In a similar way, the God of creation is also the basis for God giving the land to Israel. In Genesis 1 and 2, we do remember that the word used for God as he creates, and especially in chapter 2, as we give attention to, he made Eden, the garden, to place Adam and then to give him Eve so that he might accomplish his mission. And there we were able to see what was that momentary life of perfect communion like. That we'll see, therefore, he's Yahweh there, Genesis 2, and he is Yahweh now in the book of Joshua, giving Canaan to the tribes of Israel, Abraham's descendants. It's Yahweh. Yahweh, the covenant God of Israel, is Yahweh the creator. And if Yahweh, the creator, is also the one who has promised to give to Abraham's descendants this land, that is the basis for why he can and should give land to whom he chooses. So as creation displayed Yahweh's power, so also in the conquest of giving Canaan to Israel, it will also show his power. Now, one of the ways in which this is shown to us, there can be a little bit of a hiccup for us. So go to chapter 5. The ending of chapter 5, we see Joshua, when he comes by Jericho, that he lifted up his eyes and he looked, and behold, this is starting in verse 13, and a man was standing opposite him with his sword drawn in his hand. And Joshua went to him and said to him, "Are you for us or for our adversaries?" Now, you might remember Moses also met a warrior angel of Yahweh. And so this in one sense has been a repeated thing that occurs. Jacob also met a warrior angel of Yahweh. Well, here Joshua meets this warrior angel of, we assume, Yahweh, and asks, "Are you for us or for our enemies?" Verse 14, he said, "No. Rather, I indeed come now as commander of the host of Yahweh." And Joshua fell on his face to the earth and bowed down and said to him, "What has my Lord to say to his slave?" And the commander of the host of Yahweh said to Joshua, "Remove your sandals from your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy." And Joshua did so. Now, what is this just before the conquest of Canaan begins? Now, there's a number of things that interpreters we have to wrestle with, but clearly what we are able to see, what now is different is this angelic warrior of Yahweh comes before the appointed leader of Yahweh's people, and instead of fighting with that leader, he now fights for the leader. And Joshua does not have to fight with him, but rather bows down before him and worships him. And therefore, as we go through the rest of the story of the conquest, we are able to see, as we turn over to the end, Joshua 24, and see in verses 12 through 15, it was the Lord who delivered Canaan into the hands of Israel. Then I sent the hornet before you, and it drove out the two kings of the Amorites from before you, but not by your sword or your bow. And I gave you a land on which you had not labored, and cities which you had not built, and you have lived in them. You are eating of vineyards and olive groves which you did not plant. Right? So verse 11 just says that Yahweh says, thus I gave them into your hands, that is the people, and it is Yahweh who gave the land to Israel. So the beginning of the conquest, this warrior host, this warrior leader of the host of Yahweh, he shows up and he is for Israel and against the enemies. The conclusion, Yahweh himself says, I gave you the peoples and I gave you the land. So the conclusion is that we're able to see it is the power of Yahweh that delivered Canaan into the hands of Israel. It is not Israel. So it is the character of God as creator and as covenant maker that provides fulfillment of these promises. The God of creation is the God of covenant, and therefore it is his power that is the basis for not only creation's existence, but also for him giving the land to Israel. That also helps when we have certain questions, like why was it right for God to give the land to Israel? Well, one of the reasons is because that's what God chose to do. He made it. He gets to do with it what pleases him. It also is true is that when you remember Noah's sons in Genesis 9, one of those sons did what was wrong in the eyes of the Lord in the way in which he did not cover the nakedness of his father. If we were to travel and see whose descendants are these people in Canaan, they're his descendants. And he was cursed in Genesis 9. When Moses gave a blessing and a cursing to those three sons, the curse of that son is being executed now as we see Israel go into Canaan, which again shows us when we read the Old Testament, who is ruling and reigning over all of the enterprises of the nations? It is Yahweh. It is our God. Now that's a helpful theological point today. And while the three of you and me are not necessarily significantly influenced by Charlie Kirk, I have listened to a number of people who are memorializing him and the way in which he was, one, a consistent Christian, which is very rare. Number two, the way he was courageous. And number three, that he lived with convictions. Many people have been greatly influenced positively by his life. And then when you see him assassinated, murdered in front of his family because of those very things, I'm listening to Ben Shapiro live, and Ben Shapiro, who seems to be very articulate and never to lack an ability to speak, is had to say, he's going to have to get off and gather himself. There is not hope for people who do not have the Lord as their God. When you see people who live for the truth and to do so for the good of others being gunned down in front of their family, if you did not believe that the Lord is ruling and reigning, then you would be hopeless. And if you are hopeless, the only way that you would respond to things is you would do what is wise in your own eyes. We are not those who think that today things have happened in such a way that the Lord is not reigning and ruling. In the same way that we see God rules and reigns in the lives of nations, so God rules and reigns in the lives of families, and he rules and reigns in the lives of individuals. And today, in the assassination of the political leader, Charlie Kirk, we're able to say the Lord has his purposes in this. And we do not need to despair. We need to be courageous. And we need to trust that indeed God is going to achieve his promises, including this. And the last thing we need to do is be afraid and to act like lawless people. One of the theological lessons that we will also learn through the book of Judges, and we see this being developed with what was said to be the key for Joshua in verse 8, and that is that we're going to see God has chosen for Israel's obedience to be the means to take the land. Now, this is going to be dramatically illustrated in the first two cities that we are able to see Israel goes into. And so if you go to chapter 6, right after this warrior angelic servant of Yahweh comes, we see that they come to Jericho. And we probably are most familiar with Jericho, so I'm not going to read the whole thing, but Yahweh gave the command of what Israel was to do, and they were to, looking at verse 11, starting verse 10, but Yahweh commanded the people, saying, you shall not shout, nor let your voice be heard, nor let a word proceed out of your mouth until the day I tell you, shout, then you shall shout. So he had the ark of Yahweh taken around the city, circling it once, and then they came to the camp and spent the night there. All right. We know that they did this eventually 7 times. And then they obeyed and they shouted. And what happens? The walls of Jericho fall down, and they go in and they take Jericho. And so in that sense, we're able to see that the victory at Jericho was very clearly achieved through the means of Israel obeying Yahweh. Now, chapter 7, we go to a totally different city and a totally different outcome. And verse 1 tells us, but the sons of Israel acted unfaithfully in regard to the things devoted to destruction. Achan, the son of Carmi, the son of Zabdi, the son of Zerah from the tribe of Judah, took some of the devoted things. Therefore, the anger of Yahweh burned against the sons of Israel. So now the narrator gives to us insights about why are the events that go on to be narrated for us in chapter 7. Why did they happen that way? Because of disobedience. Achan's sin, which is indeed dealt with by Joshua starting in verse 16, he has to deal with it. But the reason that they do not take Ai is because they sinned. They disobeyed God. And so both of these are, again, they are at the very beginning of the conquest of Canaan, and we see a victory over the great city of Jericho and then defeat over the lesser city of Ai. And the reason is because they obeyed Yahweh at Jericho and they disobeyed Yahweh in Achan's sin at Ai. Both of these teach us a positive and negative side of the truth that God has ordained that Israel's obedience to his word would be the means that they take the land. So Israel was continually called upon by the Lord to enter into the battle, if need be, to die, in order to secure the fulfillment of God's plan. In that sense, we are able to see that the means of Israel receiving the land which God gives to them is by trust and obedience. Trust in his word that therefore manifests in obedience to it. Another lesson that we're going to learn is that the Sinai covenant that Israel indeed in chapter 24, they recommit themselves to. You could say they renewed the covenant that Yahweh made with Israel at Sinai, but now they renew it at Shechem. that this is not the hope of Israel. Now, there's mirrors here. In Deuteronomy chapters 30 and 31, you find almost like a mirror example of what we read in Joshua chapter 24. And we also see that, like Deuteronomy 30, verse 19, so we're able to see in verse 15 of Joshua 24, and I'm reading verse 15, if evil is in your sight to serve Yahweh, choose for yourselves today whom you will serve, whether the gods which your fathers served, which were beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you are living. But as for me and my house, we will serve Yahweh. That's exactly what, in one sense, Moses said to Israel as they were going into the land, as they failed to go into the land, and as the new generation was going to the land, Israel must choose to serve Yahweh. The way in which the covenant promises were given, they did not in any way bypass the volitional choice of God's covenant people. They engaged the volition, the choices of God's covenant people to worship Him, to serve Him, to believe Him, to trust Him, to obey Him. Covenant blessing is not in any way over and against the trust and obedience of God's covenant people. But indeed, it's for this reason that we see that Israel, just like Deuteronomy 31, verse 29 said, so in Joshua chapter 24, verse 19, Israel will not obey. They will not choose to serve the Lord. We read verse 19, then Joshua said to the people, you will not be able to serve Yahweh, for He is a holy God. He is a jealous God. He will not forgive your transgressions or your sins. So what's Joshua's view of Israel as he looks into their future? Negative. It's the same view that Moses had of Israel as Moses looked into the future and even saw further into the future. So Joshua sees into the future at the very end when they are renewing the covenant that Yahweh made with them through Moses at Sinai, now through Joshua at Shechem in Canaan. What we learn is that Israel would forsake God. And though Joshua foresees them entering into exile, read with me verses 21 through 27 in the ending of Joshua. The people said to Joshua, no, but we will serve Yahweh. And Joshua said to the people, you are witnesses against yourselves, that you have chosen for yourselves Yahweh to serve Him. And they said, we are witnesses. So now put away the foreign gods which are in your midst, and incline your hearts to Yahweh, the God of Israel. And the people said to Joshua, we will serve Yahweh our God, and we will listen to His voice. So Joshua cut a covenant with the people that day, and made for them a statute and a judgment in Shechem. And Joshua wrote these words in the book of the law of God, and he took a large stone and set it up there under the oak that was by the sanctuary of Yahweh. And Joshua said to all the people, behold, this stone shall be for a witness against us, for it has heard all the words of Yahweh which he spoke to us. Thus it shall be for a witness against you, lest you deny your God. Then Joshua dismissed the people, each to his inheritance. So when Joshua raises, in that sense, this memorial stone, what is the point of the memorial stone? To what? Yeah. Why would you need to erect a memorial stone to a covenant that you make if you're going to keep it? it could be a warning if you break it, but Joshua has already said that they will not serve Yahweh. And yet they say that they will serve Yahweh, and so he leads them, and they make this memorial stone at Shechem to be a witness to them for when they break it. So that when Yahweh does judge them with exile, they will be able to see that indeed that stone bears witness to the fact that they cut this covenant with Yahweh according to the terms of the Sinaitic covenant. In that sense, we're able to see that the hope that Joshua has for Israel is not in the Sinaitic covenant. It's not in that renewed covenant that they made. Rather, it is going to be looking to a future hope of Israel. Now, let's read 28 through 33. Joshua dismissed the people each to his inheritance. Now it happened that after these things, Joshua the son of Nun, the servant of Yahweh, died, being 110 years old. And they buried him in the territory of his inheritance in Timnath Serah, which is in the hill country of Ephraim, on the north of Mount Gaash. And Israel served Yahweh all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who survived Joshua, who knew all the work of Yahweh which he had done for Israel. Now they buried the bones of Joseph, which the sons of Israel brought up from Egypt, at Shechem, and the portion of the field which Jacob had brought from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem, for 100 keseta. And they became the inheritance of Joseph's sons. And Eleazar, the son of Aaron, died, and they buried him at Gibeah of Phinehas, his son, which was given him in the hill country of Ephraim. Now, it requires a little bit of thinking, but if you were having your bones buried at the same place that Joseph had his sons take his bones when they came out of Egypt and buried them at Shechem, what is your hope? If you need to be buried with your people in the place that your God had promised to your father Abraham, do you have just a present or a past hope, or do you have a future hope? And does your future hope transcend the grave? It does. That we are able to see, in one sense, by the narrative of Joshua, that the hope of Joshua, as well as the priest Eleazar, consistent with the hope of their father Jacob, because of the covenant promise of God made to Abraham, that the hope of that promise, the covenant promise to Abraham, is one that is going to be achieved ultimately with resurrection and life in a new land. I therefore think that what Joshua does for us is to say the Sinaitic covenant that they renew in the first 28 verses of Joshua 24 is not their hope, but rather the basis for which they bury their bones in Shechem. That is, God fulfilling these covenant promises in the future. There is a hope beyond the exile that they look to, where there will be a resurrection and a restoration of all God's people in the very place that he has promised. So I give that to be a broader presentation of the message of Joshua. And next week we'll come and try to march our way. It'll be a pretty fast march through the book of Joshua. I'm hoping to do something like this, to where going through the rest of the Old Testament books, we're going to be taking at most 2 nights, maybe 1 night for some of them. So that does mean we'll be skipping a rock, and we will not really be diving into the water and seeing it at great detail. But think of it as this is a theological survey of the books of the Old Testament in the order that they are given to us in the Hebrew Bible. Any questions from this? Any from Zoom land, Bo? All right. Thanks. Y'all are dismissed.